Good afternoon. So I think I might be the hurdle to your plane ride or other drinks. So I'm not going to talk too fast, but maybe a little fast. My name is Raymond Dusso. I'm in the End User Computing Center of Excellence practice. My focus for the last 4 years has been ThinApp. With me today is Ryan Brombach from GE and Christopher Mensch. So they're going to have about 10 minutes at the end to talk about their best practices and their experience using application virtualization. So let's get started. Disclaimer. Read. Perfect. Key takeaways. ThinApp design process overview, strategic initiatives, implementation best practices, roadmap highlights, and then obviously, as I said, GE, real-world observations. If we get done in time, there's microphones for some light Q&A as needed. So one of the things that I'm going to focus on first, so in my role at VMware, I write a lot of documentation as far as the ThinApp jumpstarts, the PSO service offerings. So a jumpstart that I created and have updated a number of times. Also a plan and design service. So one of the things I'm going to talk about today is that design process overview, or that methodology that we're attempting to make it easier for you to step through that design process. This one surprises me that I have to keep saying it, so here we go. Listen to and document customer pain points. It's amazing that listening often is forgotten. So when I do a lot of ride-alongs and I talk to partners, and it's surprising how often you just miss those subtle hints from the customer about what their pain actually is. So we're gonna talk about that today, and as the ability to gain trusted advisor status quickly is really correlated to that ability to listen to their pain points. And then, ThinApp has that ability to mold itself around that pain and create real-world solutions. Don't be afraid of ThinApp streaming. I hear a lot. One of the things that's been happening lately is I'll get a call on a Monday saying, hey, I've got a 6,000-seat Few deployment, and I want to use ThinApp streaming for all of it. Could you just tell me how that scales? Expecting an email that says, yeah, it scales great, good luck. It's something that we're aggressively going after to better explain. So there's some content in here about what we're working on, and hopefully to get IP in your hands that you'll be able to actually answer the question, probably not in a 2-word email, but definitely in some much more appropriate ways. Reuse existing deployment infrastructure. I hear this a lot. A lot of people say, well, we need to, implement new or better technologies, whereas I tend to go the other way. I say, I've dealt with customers that have Alteris, for example, and they tell me, and this is not a knock against Alteris, this is not VMware saying it, but the customer is very unhappy with the overall implementation. They want to move to something else. They're looking at other vendors. Whereas I sort of flip it and say that by integrating ThinApp into that solution, you're able to clean up a lot of those headaches and frustrations across client and server infrastructure. So it's definitely one of those ROI points that people often overlook. Don't be afraid of third-party tools. I haven't been involved with the product as long as some of the people. As a matter of fact, I believe Jonathan Clark, founder of Thinstall, is in the room. So he's in hiding, so it'll be a little Where's Waldo. If you can, he's in the room, find him. It's a little mission. Anyways, don't be afraid of third-party tools. So it really comes down to, as ThinApp has evolved, more and more third-party software companies have decided to embrace ThinApp and actually adopt and integrate our technology into their technology. So I'm gonna highlight one today that really alleviates and integrates with ThinApp in a very interesting way. So the design process overview. is the following. And most of this is relatively common sense, but lined up in this way, we found that it's a much easier process to follow. And there's just some subtle things about each of these steps that build on to the other steps. So use case definition. Again, as I said, listening to the customers. That's the biggest thing. You know, I can't tell you how many times the customer has said, this one application is the most important thing in my environment. However, it is a challenge to package it, so the salesperson would just avoid that and just not talk about it, because it is a longer process to capture it. Well, that's not exactly the right approach. The trusted advisor would at least spend time attempting to address that. So it's one of those subtle sales versus pre-sales versus post-sales challenges, which is, I live in the post-sales side. So once you've established use case definition, the target application list needs to be created. This is the part that people always overlook. Often I'm handed a list of applications that SCCM spit out, or some other, like an intern went around desk to desk and just wrote all these applications down. And it's often not the most accurate or appropriate to just throw at these projects. So VMware and myself and the rest of my team have aggressively been going after assessment services. So you may have seen from VMware a service called the DAVA, the Desktop Application Virtualization Assessment Service Offering. So it really is looking at the ability of using tools to analyze desktops and applications in your environment, and then hand you better information about which applications should be virtualized using ThinApp. We're now heading towards another adjustment to that thinking, where we really want to strive to make an end-user computing assessment so that it's not just application virtualization. As we're moving towards Horizon, as applications become web-enabled, we really want to look at applications that, which ones are SaaS applications? Which ones could be potentially ThinApp packages? Should you have this application physically installed inside of your VM or some other option? So again, it's moving away from a single-minded thinking of application virtualization only. We're really looking at an end-user computing assessment. So that's something that we're working on in addition to this type of effort. Application integration design. Again, where ThinApp will touch, or where applications have additional touch points. Some customers use ThinApp simply for the fact that we can eliminate the challenges of Java. So again, some customers I've been to, they have 12 to 15 different Java versions in their environment. And so they've got, some developers and some users have, 4 different workstations, because one Java will break the other Java as they get going. So again, you know the drill. ThinApp has the ability to isolate those and eliminate those application conflicts. The application integration design really is where you would be identifying those types of applications and scenarios. Application management is really looking at, how you're going to update, how you update your existing applications today versus, how you'll do it in the future. And again, addressing any of those challenges during that section. Packaging infrastructure standards is also a very important part. One of the biggest competitive advantages, I think, of ThinApp is that most packaging environments can quickly adopt ThinApp because ThinApp is not asking them to change all their processes. I did an engagement, a POC for a customer, and so this hits two of our key takeaways. So the customer actually handed out a requirements document for the POC, and I was shocked to find out that I was the only one that read the document. Each of the other vendors came in and said, "Oh, no, you have to change your 10-team global packaging, methodology. You have to gut it, just kill it, and you have to use this. And you have to use, this deployment mechanism and all these crazy things." Whereas I came in and said, "You know what? We're going to work really hard to integrate with your Wise Package Studio installation because that's what you do globally," and we did. Also, looking at their deployment mechanism, we bended and molded ThinApp into that situation. So again, listening to the customer and the packaging infrastructure is, a lot of these things are built upon that mechanism to actually capture and package these applications. And the final one is the deployment infrastructure design. Again, looking at whether to use existing, whether to go something new. Is VDI going to be in play? Obviously, VMware has a desktop virtualization solution as well, so that's where you would start making those decisions. Is Citrix going to be involved? A lot of customers ask me, well, they're afraid to use that word in front of me, but to be honest, from an ROI perspective, ThinApp actually makes Citrix better. A lot of VMware sales reps don't like when I say that, but again, that's the nature of this game. So those are the decisions that are actually made in the deployment design phase. So again, that circle is a pretty straightforward approach as to how you do the design process. Strategic initiatives. This is actually a pretty important section. So as I said, getting an email or a call on a Monday asking for, I want to use ThinApp streaming to 6,000 view desktops, and it's not really easy to provide a one-word, answer in an email. So again, now we're starting to look at breaking down the areas of investigation. So obviously, first step, ThinApp streaming, and we need to figure out what it's doing and how to better explain to customers and consultants how to test it, how to graph it, how to, we're working towards the methodology of how to test applications and then actually spit out a number that makes sense. Disk, which is ThinApp repository, and how many applications you can actually run off of a network share so that reads and writes don't crush the disk. Again, that's coming soon. We're actually reforming partnerships with NetApp and EMC that's specifically ThinApp based. Obviously, we have a very solid relationship from a view perspective, but I think we're taking it to the next level to actually determine those nuances around applications running off those disks as well, those storage infrastructure. So step one, establish the framework. I believe we're complete. We've actually been testing this in the field with a number of large enterprises. Verify methodology. We're definitely I think I need to change the slide. I think we're definitely way ahead on that. And then creating the testing guideline. Ultimately, there's a document that has been written by my colleague Mark Ewert, and it's called the ThinApp Network Impact Study Guide, so that we're going to provide you a framework using Wireshark and a series of VMs to monitor the conversations between a ThinApp package and the SAN. And then take that data and be able to calculate how much bandwidth your proposed VM will have on your network and disk as well. So really, really excited about that process. So again, as I was getting into this ThinApp streaming, what I started to do is break down some of the components to better explain it so that people understand what's happening. Bless you. So at double click, a request goes to the network share, and at that point, you've got disk reads, and then the data transfer starts coming back, which, as we have generically called, is the ThinApp streaming process. But what we're trying to do is break down that traffic so that people know and understand exactly what's coming across. So as you'll see on the diagram, we've determined that there's actually the ThinApp payload is in the middle, and you have TCP/IP overhead that is SAN traffic. So that has nothing to do with ThinApp, but there is some traffic on either side of that payload, and that ends up being what we're calling the ThinApp streaming workload, which then correlates to the ThinApp streaming lifecycle, because as you launch the ThinApp package over time, you get this because you can have multiple connections to that share. So again, multiple ThinApp streaming workloads make up, obviously, the ThinApp streaming lifecycle, which then in turn you can add up those streaming life cycles to then provide, as I said, that total footprint or network calculation for this VM with ThinApp, and then have a better idea when your network admin comes to you and starts yelling at you because he's claiming congestion on the network. You can actually say, well, I've calculated it per this many users. We should not be taxing the network. Clearly it's Pandora in the next room, the users that's streaming music. Anyways. So next steps. As I said, I need to delete the coming soon. I'm not going to do it now, but the ThinApp Network Streaming Network Impact Study Guide is very important. We're very excited about it, and that will be, we believe, the start of a better understanding of ThinApp streaming and the network impact. ThinApp repository best practices, we're really looking at that document to be not VMware paper. I think what I really want to have done is that EMC and we would help those two companies and Nexenta help us write that. But it would be from their perspective to gain that credibility. So how many people use View? Wow, that's cool. Good. How many of you are aware of some ThinApp entitlement issues, removing applications? Anybody heard that before? Oh boy, 3 hands, perfect. Occasionally when you're trying to remove the entitlement of a ThinApp package to a pool of desktops, you get an error message. And what happens is a user or a desktop has locked that application and the View administrator has issues removing the app. It's not really a View thing or a ThinApp thing, it's just the laws of physics and the time-space continuum. The app is running in memory on that other desktop, and you can't just walk over to that desktop because it's sitting in the data center. So it presents a little bit of a challenge. So I asked again, Mark Ewert, who, everybody needs a Mark Ewert, by the way. If you don't have one, you need to get one. So awesome. So I asked him, because he's been working with PowerShell, and I understand about 40% of PowerShell, and take that combined with what he was trying to teach me about some SRM work that he's been doing, and I was able to ask him, is it possible to use PowerShell to tunnel into and pull for desktops in a pool or individual desktops from Virtual Center, and then tunnel into them and determine what applications were entitled, and then phase 3 to actually delete those apps or kill the application inside the desktop. So what you now see is a PowerShell scripting utility or mechanism that talks to Virtual Center, talks to your View infrastructure, and I believe this can also work with Citrix infrastructure, but I'm not quite certain that we've tested it yet, but it's generic PowerShell commands. So, and because most Citrix installations are sitting on top of vSphere, chances are this should work for that as well. And then ultimately remove those ThinApp packages from the infrastructure, from the desktops. So again, summary: inventory deployed ThinApp packages on pools, desktops, remove ThinApp packages on pools and desktops. Does anybody see value in this? I got 2 hands. Okay, maybe we'll work on this. Okay, so implementation best practices. As I meet with customers, it becomes more and more difficult to explain the complexity of the capture and build lifecycle. So what I've done is, you'll see in slides, I've tried to graph it in a much more logical process to walk you through the entire process. Because when ThinApp is sold to people, it's sold as, well, it's easy. You just package it and it's done. It takes 8 seconds. And that happens sometimes, but there's other, some apps take longer. So again, we're trying to document the capture and build lifecycle to make it easier for people. Deployment strategies, we're going to go into some of the work that I've done around enterprise deployment and how ThinApp can integrate into those environments. And then again, as I said earlier, third-party deployment options as well. So the first question I always ask is, where is the best place to run the utilities from? And people often have an answer, well, you just have to run it on the network share, which is probably the best approach. There's been some new data lately to actually suggest that not only should you run the ThinApp packages inside of the VM that you're sitting and not on the network share, but also from a physical desktop perspective. So there's some larger applications, like a Visual Studio 2008, that we've actually had success using one of those stack of 50 desktops that you have sitting in your corner that you don't use anymore, using one of those to actually package these applications, and you gain performance and cut down on that time. Then using a tool like either a Ghost or a Cronus to essentially re-image that C, you roll it back to a clean image again, just like you would a snapshot inside of Fusion or Workstation. So again, these are the types of questions that we're now sort of adjusting the way and best practices from the early start to this cycle. So phase 2, I'll view that process. You've got, hopefully everybody understands the basic process, which is, clean VM, snapshot, target installation phase, snapshot, configuration, and then build. I'm trusting that you all understand that process. But where people sort of have misconceptions is logically we want to walk you through that dev, UAT, and prod process, because a lot of people, I'm finding, don't have pure testing environments. So again, what we're trying to do is stage this so that you can actually test applications better and logically walk it through the production process. So again, by having these 3 separate shares and the ThinApp package that gets created walks through that process. So again, it starts out at dev, and you're now going into the capture and build testing lifecycle, at which point the package then migrates to UAT, the user accepting, and a lot of this is common sense, but not a lot of people do it. So we're trying to help you to help us to help you to actually do it. Production-ready testing, which again is right before you go to production. Pick a series of desktops through SMS or SCCM or Alteris or View or what have you, and then before you roll it out, actually test it one final time. Then we work into the actual production deployment scenario that I'll get into in a second. So first we're going to start with ESD deployment. How many people know what ESD stands for? Electronic Software Distribution. Okay. Examples are SCCM from Microsoft, Alteris, HP Radia, I believe it's called. So most organizations have some sort of distribution mechanism. So what I've tried to do is from a ThinApp perspective, figure out how I can, using one ThinApp repository, feed applications to any one of those systems. So what we have is the boxes on the bottom are ThinApp packages. So you have your core applications that typically get deployed to C program files. So on a physical desktop, we can then integrate into SCCM through MSIs, where now rather than an install of an application, we're actually able to just do a glorified file copy to those systems, and then using app link packages, we can deploy those through those same MSIs down to the system. So in many layers, we're able to clean up that process, because most ESD solutions that are installing applications natively, the biggest pain point for the customer is those complexities. So the SCCM admins, for example, have to worry about what applications the user installed, and is this next package going to just, destroy the house of cards? So it's a constant struggle, a constant care and feeding of that process. With ThinApp and its isolation capabilities, we're able to eliminate a lot of those challenges and remove the physical installs from the disk, thus cleaning up the user environment and cutting down on the management time of deployment. I was at a large customer, and we were talking about a 19.5 gig Rational Security Advisor package. And we discussed this for about an hour as to, is this a business use case? And sure enough, it was. And we were able to not only ThinApp the 19.5 gig package, but cut down the deployment in half, which was 20 some odd hours for one user. We were able to cut that in half. So not only take an application that was this boat anchor that was tied to all these desktops, now we're able to pull it and expand its deployment. So we were actually deploying it inside of View and physical desktops, which is a very powerful use case. So again, getting into it, physical or virtual machines, we're able to lay down the same files on the physical desktop and using that same core ThinApp repository. So in a VDI environment, and again, I should list View here, but as I've said, this could be Citrix or View. The same ThinApp repository and file structure can then be fed into your virtual environment. An option with ThinApp is to fully deploy the packages into the View desktops, so that again, it's the same glorified file copy as with the ESD solution or the ESD version, But again, you're laying it down in the same way so that now the look and feel of the physical desktop is the same as the look and feel in the virtual desktop, which is a very strong ROI case. But now we've added in the option of ThinApp streaming to go back to that same repository. So again, I've just described one ThinApp repository that's feeding conceptually 3 separate deployment strategies, which is really important. We have a number of former Citrix employees on staff at VMware. I am lucky to work with someone named Justin Venezia, who's a consulting architect in the southeast US, and he has helped me to create this graphic, which talks about where ThinApp fits into the Citrix environment. Now, I'm not going to go through all this, but the one problem that this often backfires on me is that customers say, well, that looks really complicated. And yes, it is. But ThinApp actually does resolve some of this challenge. So again, it's a very intriguing use case to have ThinApp working with your Citrix environment. So from a third-party utility, I'm not timing my water breaks very well. I apologize. LiquidWareLabs. How many know who LiquidWareLabs is? It's a good amount of hands. They do have a booth on the show floor. So they have a product called Profile Unity, and its primary function, until about 6 months ago, was to do persona management. So again, you could easily manage your persona to sort of alleviate some of the challenges with roaming profiles and manage persona. So again, this is the rough sketch of what Profile Unity is doing. Tied to your domain controllers, you're able to run a service on your desktop that actually will migrate the user's persona to a network share. Now, that same utility, the Profile Unity solution, you actually have the ability to deploy ThinApp packages to users and meter, monitor, and understand that deployment. So again, it is a really intriguing solution for customers. Roadmap highlights. I'm making you all sign a mental NDA, so do that now. Awesome, thank you. ThinApp Factory. I'm trusting that you probably, how many heard about ThinApp Factory this week? Good? Is everybody excited about it? Should be. So ThinApp Converter was a product that basically would take existing silent MSI packages and mass convert them to ThinApp projects. Very excited about it. That process has been or is evolving into what's called the ThinApp Factory, and I'll show you a graphic in a second. But we're very excited about that tie-in to Horizon. So conceptually, imagine an appliance that sits in your data center and you're watching it, and it goes out to adobe.com, grabs a new version, brings it back in, creates a ThinApp packages of it, and sends it to Horizon, at which point automatically deploying it to users. That's really cool. How many people agree that that's cool? That's a lot of hands. Well done. You're still paying attention. So, with that said, Horizon App Factory, App Manager, is the next evolution, or the desktop cloud from VMware. So phase 1, which was released earlier this year, focuses primarily on SaaS-based applications and multi-factor authentication. And it's working really great. As a matter of fact, VMware has transferred a lot of its internal web infrastructure over to this platform, and people love it. It's working great. Phase 2, which is coming later this year, is ThinApp management and distribution. So again, you'll be able to deploy ThinApp packages to physical desktops, to virtual desktops, to anywhere the Horizon agent will sit, and we're moving towards this non-Windows OS concept. So again, as we start going forward, Horizon is going to be that platform that's going to start to deploy applications, Windows applications, in some very intriguing ways. So again, and there is a demo. I'm not sure when the show floor closes, but they were doing a Horizon demo at the VMware booth. Really cool. So again, ThinApp Factory, as you see, internal applications in the form of MSIs and ISV feeds and service provider feeds like an adobe.com are then brought into the factory, packaged, and then sent to what we're calling the ThinApp Store. But again, ultimately, that's what we feel is the Horizon integration as well, so that we feel that that's an integration point. But again, ThinApp Store could also be any one of any other type of publication. So again, Horizon overview, it's a little small to see, but I just wanted to, once again, tell people I'm very excited about the ThinApp integration with Horizon, and as you see in the demo in the VMware booth, it actually is working, which is very exciting. Okay, with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ryan from GE, and he's going to give a quick overview of their platform.
Thank you, Ray. Good afternoon, everyone. As Ray had mentioned, my name is Ryan Brumback, and I work for GE's Client Innovations Group. And today, we'd like to share some insight into how application virtualization can intersect with an overall VDI architecture. Now, of the various VDI design components, there are really a few that we'd like to call out. The first of those is your selection of an underlying operating system coupled with that of your directory services. Now, by virtue of technologies like group policy, you literally have hundreds, if not thousands, of ways to customize your guest operating system. And you also provide a foundational framework for per-user application entitlement. The second two I'd like to call out are your selection of a network infrastructure coupled with that of your storage selection. Now, unless you're looking to deploy applications to the virtual hard disk of every virtual machine in your environment, you're probably going to centralize and consolidate that on a single storage share. The performance of that single storage share, coupled with a high bandwidth, low latency network, is going to be critical to your end user experience. Talking more specifically about the user virtualization experience, we have the idea of virtual app provisioning. Now, through many of the technologies that we're already familiar with, many of the scripting languages that we all work with every day, we can do things like run logon scripts that query Active Directory or any directory services for specific user groups, and then entitle those applications directly into the user session. The second point I'd like to talk to within the user virtualization experience, overall user virtualization experience, is the idea of persona. Persona is the personality, and that personality can be captured by really a plethora of different technologies. Some of those technologies are available to us out of the box. One of those is the use of roaming profiles. Roaming profiles can be thought of as a local user profile, but extrapolated and stored in a network location. Now, over time, those roaming user profiles can become bloated and can ultimately affect things like the user log-on and the user log-off process. And that's where other, again, out-of-the-box technologies like folder redirection come into play. Now, folder redirection can extrapolate or remove some of those settings out of the roaming profile and store them in a separate location. So what that ultimately does is it makes that roaming profile lighter weight, and it takes it from potentially minutes at logon down to seconds. Now, folder redirection has another play, and that specifically is with application sandboxing. Essentially, you can take your application sandbox and store it again in another location, thus further enabling your personality management. The final point that I'd like to touch on is the performance of virtual applications in your core image. And really the seed that I'd like to plant here is that we found that it's very important to keep your finger on the pulse of your user expectation, specifically asking yourself, is a delta of an additional 10 seconds every time someone launches core applications like Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, is that acceptable? And if it's not, to look at an approach where you bake applications into the core image, and you also look to application virtualization as a solution for third-party applications. And now I'd like to welcome Chris Minch to the stage to talk more specifically about how we've bridged the gaps in these areas. Thank you.
Afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Chris Minch, and I lead the Application Solutions team for General Electric Client Innovations Division. And what I'm here to specifically talk about is how we enabled a rich and vivid end consumer experience like an end consumer could have on a traditional PC. So as I said, let's kind of rehash a couple things that we did. First, we have control via directory services to give down group policies, to put people in the proper groups, and ultimately control pieces of their login and logout experience. So let's get into the login experience a little bit, because it's really what enables this technology to be successful in the VDI environment. So the first thing we can do is user-level application provisioning. This is great because we know that different businesses and sub-businesses are going to need different applications. So what we did here is we created things called vApps and vGroups. vGroups being tied to the applications that we virtualize in the environment, and then vGroups having a storage of applications that are specific to a business or sub-business. So as soon as the user logs into any VDI-based environment, we provision them with the right applications every time. Huge win. Next part is, let's talk about more of the details behind the login process. Another thing that we can do is we can detect what we have installed traditionally in the environment, or what we call baked in, versus what's a virtual application in the environment. Based upon what we detect and don't detect, we can actually do different folder and printer redirections. Finally, we allow very granular device access control with our login process. At the end of the day, we want to know what devices are approved and coming into the environment versus a possibly malicious device coming into the environment where we would not want it to. It gives us very granular and tight control of what's coming in and what's going out. The second part of the equation is, how do we enable a business or sub-business to be successful in the environment? And what it comes down to is the granular OS and application customizations, and also the applications that get delivered to the business and sub-businesses. With that, we've done some very unique GPO things based upon domains that the businesses come into. Secondarily, we've created something called GE App Market. And what GE App Market does is it allows an end consumer to get into an application, find the application they're looking for, and either uninstall, install, or even request the application. The great thing about virtualization is we know who's coming into the environment. We know their business, we know their sub-business. Based upon that, we can give them applications or allow them to request applications that go to the proper functions at our business. We have different licensing, we have different compliance teams. Knowing that we know the business that they're coming from, we can actually direct them to the right teams to get provisions for the application in the future. Ultimately, both these technologies work with each other. If you install or uninstall or request an application from our app market, every other session after that is going to give you that application, or not give you the application based upon what you did with the GE app market. So let's touch on the next piece that Ryan spoke of. It's really the end consumer aspect of, is this running right or is this not the right thing for me? And it goes into how we've been trying to optimize the virtualized application environment, as well as how we metrics it for success. So the first thing we did is we made the realizations, and I'm going to use Office 2010 as an example, where certain things should really be packaged for the environment that you're deploying them to. We tried to package Office 2010 in Windows XP and deploy in Windows 7. Understand we saw a lot of latency, especially in the launch time. So we decided, let's try to package it in Windows 7 and see what happens. So again, reducing some latency. Well, also, what can we do? Can we remove some drivers? Can we remove some plugins? Is there certain things that we can tweak inside the application to make it run faster? But at the end of the day, you've got to realize if you're degrading the end consumer experience enough where they're not thinking that they're going to be successful in the environment, they're not going to use the product. And that impacts us severely if they're not going to use the product that we're going to offer to them. So with that, we've made certain tools around metricsing. And with our metricsing system, we can actually launch baked-in applications or virtual applications inside our VDI environment and figure out at a very granular and metrics level what that means to the end consumer. What we've come to find out is that there are some applications like Office 2010 that don't make sense to be virtualized. It's not to say that we're not going to strive to continue increasing performance to make a virtualized application an available solution for core apps, because when you look at an IT management level, it's a lot easier to manage a virtualized application versus modifying a gold image every time you've got to make an update to that application. So with that, I would just like to say that, again, it's really around the end consumer experience. We want to ensure that we give the end consumer a product that's going to look and feel and give them the experience like a traditional PC they use today does. With that said, I'll give it back to Ray here and we'll finalize the conversation.
I was thinking that we could all just stay up here too. So with that, I did in fact speed talk through my part. They actually slowed down. I thought was nice of them, but I in fact sped talk. So we've got close to 18 minutes left. So you have your choice. You can either have that time back to go do what you do, or we can do Q&A if you'd like, and go from there. So there's microphones if you want to come up and ask questions, or you can run screaming from the room. That's your call. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we got some actually.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I have one question. I work for the DoD, and some of our networks are not connected to the internet. And usually we have one network that is. You said that we could have them automatically download in ThinApp some of our applications. Is it possible to pull those off of a network that's connected to the internet and upload it to the networks that are not, so that they'll push those applications out as well through Horizon?
Yeah, I believe so. One thing that I tried to get the ThinApp developers to understand is that we can't forget about the admin. So there is going to be a series of admins that are going to be essentially watching and manipulating the Horizon and ThinApp Factory appliances. And so what that would do is, from a secure situation, to then download to a location that the App Factory would go and grab, and then package, and then spit out. As far as the publishing to different locations, that I'm not sure about. So again, but the basic model of feeding the ThinApp Factory would more than likely accommodate for that scenario.
Thank you.
Maybe I misheard you, but I thought you said when you're packaging up your ThinApp packages that you use a repurposed machine. Why not a VM and just snapshot right beforehand and revert back?
No, absolutely. That's the standard use case. But what I was trying to convey is that we've discovered a number of other use cases for specifically large applications like Visual Studio that has the better, because of some swap space needs during the build process, you either create a VM with a 60 gig disk in it, or you leverage a physical desktop with a large hard drive. We have seen some performance increase using a physical desktop. The standard procedure is a VM using snapshots. That is absolutely the most, ideal scenario. However, I just don't want you to forget about those a new use case, as we're calling it, the large application footprint, like a Visual Studio, like a Rational, the IBM suites. We're starting to push the envelope with what we can package. And like I said, WebSphere Installation Developer is a 10.5 gig package that I did during a POC, where I have a theory that when I do POCs, there's I'll jump off a cliff, so to speak. And I know that the product is going to catch me oftentimes, and so I did that. The customer asked me about Visual Studio, and I had done WebSphere before, but I hadn't done Installation Developer. Come to find out, it was a 10.5 gig installation, and it worked great. But again, inside the VM, there was some challenges around performance, and so that started me down the path to investigate additional capture and build options.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Question for GE. You, I believe, indicated that you backed away from virtualizing Office 2010. Was that correct? And does that, I assume, means you're going to bake that in? Could you drill down a little bit on what you ran into and what led you to that decision?
Sure. So when we initially packaged Office 2010, we followed some of the recipe guides and cookbooks we saw out there, again, indicating Windows XP, .NET Framework, things like that. So based upon the environment we're going towards, and we're a completely Windows 7 environment when we talk about desktop virtualization, the first thing we just made assumption is maybe we should try packaging in that environment first and see if we get performance increase. We cut our time in half. We went from about 30 seconds to 14 seconds. So the second step was, what additional do we do inside of our Office 2010 package that might slow down this process? So a couple things is, in the add-in sections of Office 2010, there are certain plugins that get installed by default. We turned all of them off. Gained about 4 seconds there. Another thing that we found out is a lot of virtualized application suites will do certain things with font manipulation, where if you have fonts built into the container, those take a few seconds to launch as well. So what we did is we actually stripped out the fonts, put the fonts in the core of the image, and reduced another 2 seconds. But at the end of the day, we're still at about a 7 to 8 second threshold when we have a baked-in application that launches like that. So it's not to say we're not going to continue to try to increase the performance, but we know right now there's just certain limitations in that baking this thing in gives an instantaneous experience like someone else would have on a traditional PC. So there's definitely a couple things. I recommend starting with a recipe book and then kind of just, going from there and troubleshooting the application a little bit further.
For your profile management, are you only doing folder redirection and roaming profiles, or using a third party like a LiquidWare?
No, so we've leveraged the out-of-the-box functionality specifically with roaming profiles and folder redirection and found it very successful thus far. Thank you.
Is there going to be an updated version of ThinApp with VMware View 5? I know they're not released simultaneously, but just wondering, is an updated version coming?
Not yet. So the ThinApp 5 is actually slated for release. I'm not sure when, but it's on the table. We just released 4.6.2, I believe, and so we're slated to go 5. I don't even want to throw a date out there, but it's coming soon, and it's in progress.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In a multi-user environment such like a Citrix server where you're doing a ThinApp package and streaming to it, and then you go to use the multiple version, so you're going from .1 to .2 sort of thing. In the multi-user, is it cached per user? Is it, user 2 comes out of the application, then they go back in. Do they get that .2 version of the application? I'm just not sure and haven't done enough testing to figure out how the versioning is actually being impacted or being utilized by the additional connections after the application gets updated from the streaming mechanism.
I'm not completely certain I understand the question, but from an ESD perspective, those are going down to the specific user. So oftentimes in an ESD solution, we're deploying that whole .1, .2 down.
Okay.
So it's not a matter of cache, it's a physical file copy, which is very straightforward. In the form of running it from a streaming perspective off of the network share, those files stay on the network share, at which point you're just getting those ThinApp streaming into launch. So the core connectivity between the original EXE and the .1 stays on the file share. It's just any overhead of that additional pull down at first or second launch.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, just curious from a networking perspective, 1 gig or 10 gig for running ThinApp? I mean, what's generally suggested? Is a 1 gig infrastructure okay, or should you jump up to a 10 gig?
Oh, network.
Yes.
Oh, well, there's no, obviously we're going to go 10 gig. Why? We don't really have that data yet. The best thing about ThinApp, and I'll let them answer in a second, but from my perspective, ThinApp has the ability to mold around what you have, and that's really where the plan and design effort comes in. It's investigating, and we'll use what you have, and what it may come down to is you just only use, ultimately the answer I want to get to is we can only publish this many applications on that desktop because that's our limit.
Yeah, and honestly, I can comment there. So as far as what we've found, there's really not one answer, right? So is it 1 gig? Is it 10 gig? Yes, maybe it's 10 gig. It depends on what your infrastructure is. And more specifically, looking at the tools that are provided to you from your storage vendor and from your network vendor to say, have I reached that critical mass? And so as far as advising on how you would do that, leverage those tools, make a database decision, and then move forward.
Okay, thank you.
One more point to that, though. What surprises me about the network streaming piece is that over 4 years, I had pretty much 0 complaints from large enterprises that were doing ThinApp streaming. So I don't want to give you this perception that ThinApp streaming is it is working today. It's just now we just need to find more answers. And I don't want to lean on, it'll just work, because that's not good. That's not a design best practice. That's just silly. So, really this effort is to, get you answers before you need to have them, basically.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Why folder redirection and roaming profiles?
So roaming profiles by themselves over time can get bloated, and roaming profiles by default have a functionality to synchronize certain content at logon. And as that content grows, it may start out as 10 megs, but after a month or after so often, you may have 2 gigs.
It's the same roaming profile story.
Right. So essentially, so the folder redirection extrapolates a lot of the folders literally in your profile to another location, so that as part of that logon sync, it only needs to retrieve essentially the ntuser.dat before it allows you to log on to your session.
Best of both worlds kind of thing.
Right.
Cool.
Thank you.
Do you know of any future plans to change the ThinApp entitlements more towards AD groups instead of pools?
Do I?
Yeah.
Or do the Vue developers? I'm not sure I have an answer, because if I had my way, it would definitely be more user-based.
Or I mean, maybe a better question is, do you think it's silly to hope for any kind of new functionality in regards to that, since they're kind of moving away from it and going towards the ThinApp Factory and Horizon and stuff like that?
That's a great question. I'm not completely certain that there's any new ThinApp development that is slated for Vue. I believe most of the development effort right now is focused on Horizon, because as you see in the demo in the VMware booth, it is very user-centric. So I don't want to give you the idea that we're not working on a more robust user-deployed application experience using AD and other means under Vue. It's just we're focusing right now further on Horizon, on the front end, if you will, not the back end. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, it's I've played with lots of different ways. It seems like it's a management nightmare, trading one way to do it a different way. But
the functionality of Vue around allocating an application to a pool is not ideal. But there is an option to do the login script in Red to do that. But the future is Horizon. So when we release the ThinApp piece to Horizon, you'll have that ability to touch ThinApp users. That Horizon agent running on your desktop, that you'll be able to manage that. So I suspect from VMware's perspective, our perspective, we're probably not going to invest too much time in fixing Vue type of stuff, and just use Horizon for implementation.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Matt Coppinger, my team.
Okay.
Member.
Do you know if there are software vendors that are planning to make their application available already in a ThinApp version?
It's a great question, and I don't know the answer. I can put you in contact with one of the ThinApp product managers. I know that we're open to it, and we've been talking
Everything leads to that, so why not them?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it makes sense. It's just, from my perspective, when AppV tried this a year ago, I'm not quite sure the demand or the functionality worked as flawlessly as they would have liked. So I think people sort of panicked and backed away. From my perspective, I think it makes sense from a ThinApp perspective, because, again, it would be simple. It would be just either an EXE or a .dat or an MSI. So I'm not ruling it out. I don't have the exact answer for you.
Thank you.
Compatibility list. Actually, we're working on that. So we actually have, we're building relationships with people like AppDNA and ChangeBase, and combined with the assessment and or inventory capability of the ThinApp Factory, we're really heading towards an actual list. I get asked this question, that's probably the fourth question I get asked whenever I go to customer sites, and there is some passion behind it, and I understand their need, but from my perspective, it would be probably wrong to throw out, well, we can do these apps, because historically, when I tried that in the past, all the customers focused about these apps, as opposed to these apps, right? And oftentimes, these apps aren't the most important ones they need to worry about. So we'd spit out a list that said Adobe and Office and all these, but these are the apps that people need to focus on the most. And those are the ones that, I don't know about you guys, but I don't own all these apps. And half the time, I've never seen them until I get on site. So it would be very premature to put out a list that was like that. However, with ThinApp Factory and these other vendors, ChangeBase in particular, we are aggressively going after that type of assessment, quick assessment, and then getting that information into your hands so that we wouldn't show up when we walk through the door. We'd walk through the door, a couple of days' effort, hand you a list. You know, I've heard that too, but again, because we're tied to product managers and we're tied to product launches, it's very, so, you know, if you would like to start one, then by all means. Right. Show of hands, who wants him to start a community-based ThinApp portal? I got, who's counting? All right, so you're it. Tag, you're it. Good luck. You're welcome. Yeah, and there are lists. It's just, what did you say? Yeah, but and okay, that's true too. Good point. So embedded in 4.6.1 was a phone home capability where we asked for users to check a box that said, "Allow us to collect statistics." We've been collecting those statistics, and that information is also going to come out. It's just we're among all the other things we have to do, we're still a little hesitant to how to scrub that data and put it out in a meaningful way for customers. And again, without damaging, you know, here's what you should be focusing on, and then forgetting all the, because ultimately that's what's going to happen. So it's a challenge, and I'd love to email you a list. I really would, but it's just really challenging. Thank you.
You referenced that you ThinApped Visual Studio. Could you touch on a couple points on how it performed and how you accomplished that? Yeah.
It passed 98% customer UAT at Walmart. So ultimately what worked was I had the trial version, ThinApped, and I had it on a USB drive. And I went to 27 of their developers, desk to desk. And I asked them, "Hi, I'm Ray. You know, what version of Visual Studio do you have?" And it was 2003 every time. And I said, "Great, plug this in, launch this. What am I looking at? It's Visual Studio 2008. And you didn't install it, but you're using it." And they went through about 15 minutes of light UAT that they normally put through their product, and it passed 27 times. So we have it running in production. As various updates to 2008 started happening, there was a couple of SRs that I think came into play that we had to adjust, but overall, from my perspective, I call that on the good list. No problem.
Two questions.
Sure. Well, you get one, and then you have to go to the back, and then we come back. But go ahead.
All right. First one. This is for folks from GE. When you tried doing antivirus, did you burn it in on the image, or did you try one of those appliances which will automatically do antivirus scanning on the nodes?
So antivirus, I think, is a very unique situation, especially when we talk about VDI. So we've never tried to ThinApp, and we really tried not to put an AV solution into our VDI. What we really wanted to do is take the pieces that are coming out as far as your vShield or AV Move or something that we can keep away from the single-eyes desktops, but still be able to inject them and figure out what's happening. So I'm trying to best field your answer. We haven't tried putting in VDI environment, we really haven't tried to see metrics behind putting like an AV solution directly in the VDI environment. We've really tried to stay away from putting anything like that in our desktops.
Quite honestly, I think most of the time there are kernel mode drivers associated with antivirus solutions. And generally speaking, with any application virtualization product today, there are challenges with implementing those, right?
Yeah, so just to throw my stamp on that, we do not recommend attempting to ThinApp antivirus products because it's too many hooks into the OS, too many scenarios, too many updates. It's just we avoid that like.
I think the question was, are you using AV?
Yeah.
If you're not, is that because you're doing stateless desktop? You're blown away, so the attack vector, the ability to compromise the environment is confused.
Exactly. So by default, we went down a route of non-persistent link clone. So we knew that the VM was basically going to destroy itself on each log off. So it was really trying to find a lightweight solution external to that, just to make sure that things are happening and things are being scanned inside that environment.
So I know you have the second question, but we just got the hook. So we're going to move this to side stage, back of the room, with any additional questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.